I'm here today with Fazila Nurani, who wrote Words of Healing Letter by Letter, her brand new poetry book that just came out in January. And I am so excited to interview her today to kind of pick her brain and see what she wrote about and why, and what the messages kind of mean to her. And what she hopes that you get out of this book as our dedicated readers, who we are so thankful for. And we're so glad that you're joining us and watching this video to kind of introduce Fazila and her new book. So thanks for joining us. Thank you so much for being here, Fazila.
Thank you, Lacey. I'm so happy to be doing this.
Yeah, and you know what? Your book just came out. How exciting. I'm so excited to share this with people because there's so much meaning in poetry. And I was just wondering, did you always set out to be an author? As a child, did you kind of think about this as something you wanted to do when you grew up?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because I feel like I always had a creative bent to me. But I have to say, Lacey, I wanted to be a painter when I was really young.
Oh,
Yeah, I
wow.
loved, I loved drawing and I loved a lot of color. So not so much writing, but poetry is very much a creative, like artistic form of expression. I have to say though that my father would recite a lot of poetry. So I heard a lot of poetry, especially like mystical poetry. He was a very spiritual man, very much felt that life sort of leads us on a path that our soul needs to be taking. So he would recite little pieces of poetry. So I heard it a lot, but I was more into the fine arts when I was younger. Yeah.
Wow, that's so special to have your dad recite poetry. That's beautiful.
Oh,
And
he loved it. Yeah.
that was something that he kind of maybe instilled in you in your childhood, and maybe that's
Yeah.
part of it. Like, we get all of these outside things from people who shape us, and it sounds like that kind of was something that really played a big part.
Yeah,
Even
definitely it
subconscious,
did.
right? So
Yes. Yeah, because
yeah.
I was exposed to it from a really young
Yes,
age. Yeah.
definitely. So what
Yeah.
inspired you to write a poetry book?
So in that regard, I started writing poetry because I was having my own sort of spiritual journeys, and it was such a beautiful way to express. So I would write. I felt like poetry always was coming from a soulful place, a real heartfelt place for me. So to express my own emotions, I started enjoying writing poetry. And in terms of writing a poetry book, to your question, the first actually poem in my book is on the word alone. And I shared it with a friend, a very good high school friend, actually. So I'd lost touch with her and had been, reinstated our relationship, and we were communicating a lot. And when I shared it with her, she said, "Oh my gosh, Fazila, I want to share this with someone who's in a really lonely place in their lives."
Aw.
And she could really use something like this. Can I share it with her? Because I think it would really, really help her be more comfortable with aloneness. And I was, wow, yeah, for sure, share it. And so I started realizing that that's really what I wanted to do, is I wanted to be able to share pieces that would help other people, even if it was just one person. So it was the idea that, I write and I tuck it away in a book and put it on a shelf. And I do a lot of writing that means a lot to me. But what if other people would really benefit from it too? And then with this combined sort of interest in etymology, I thought, maybe I could think of a good B word to focus on and a C word. And it sort of evolved from that. Yeah.
Wow.
And then thought, wow, I could share a cool little collection. And it's a unique way to do it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you know what? It's something that I haven't seen before as a publisher in 7 years, so that is really something very special. And I always say this, like, your book could help someone else. and that's the thing that we have to realize, our words hold power. And you mentioned in your book that your words of healing letter by letter connects the analytical side with the creative side of the brain. So, can you explain that a little bit and how you've connected those two parts?
It's such an interesting thing for me because it sort of is so, the book is so me. Like I practice law and it's very analytical. It's all in the mind, right? It's like I practice privacy and information security law. I'm delving into contracts and I enjoy that work, but I also so love the creative writing. So the book is very much that way as well, because etymology, analyzing words, Old English is like the 1100s, where a lot of the origins of our words come from. 1400s is like early French, German, some Italian, and also Irish. So some of our words have these origins way back and then have changed over time in terms of their meaning. And there's some sort of, contention about, oh, where did a word actually come from? And it becomes a bit of an analytical exercise. Like, what did the word originally mean? And then, so that I find is so analytical. And then poetry is this form of expression that is all from the heart. So that mix of the analytical, oh, I didn't know a word, was originally used that way, with the artistic expression, to me is the left right brain.
Definitely. And you know what? As reading this, I absolutely love that you curated this experience for your reader, not only with adding the etymology in there, but also the layout of the poems that are just very, very special. And, you were very aware creatively of how this should read and how the poem should be set up. So, can you talk a little bit about your process of writing?
Mm.
And do you have a daily routine or a favorite place that you like to write?
Oh, that's such a great question. I wish I wrote daily. I wouldn't say it's quite daily, but when I want to create space to write, first thing I have to do, I have to say, I need to spend at least 10 minutes to meditate. Like I need to get into it because, like I said, my world is often up here. I need to be able to drop out of my mind. So I usually spend some quiet time and then a little bit of an expectant waiting time to say, what do I want to write about? And it sort of, it comes from a quieter place, which is so nice. So once I've sort of sat with that, and figured out what I want to be talking about in a particular piece of writing, I have this beautiful instructor who taught me 2 poetry courses, who gave me the best piece of advice. Her name is Shalene Wright. And she used to say to us, just write, free write, and so whether, like a journal entry or a diary, just free write on whatever it is you're trying to communicate. So I usually start with a free write, and then it's about sort of highlighting phrases or words that I really like in it. Poetry is so much about, as opposed to prose, is about tightening it, right? So it's saying more with fewer words. So I will then start to tighten that up. And at that point, trying to get really creative with some of my expression, or like you said, layout, I make a decision. Some poets like more just free verse. I like a lot of form too, and it's a bit of that structure in me. So I will, for instance, I have a piece in my book called Dear Body, which is like an ode to the body, and it's 2 sonnets, which is a particular form. So I might introduce a poetic form, or if I'm doing a free write, just focus on the imagery, or whether I want to introduce rhyme and rhythm. But it always, to me, the biggest first step is the free write. And I do like to write near a window. So I like to be able to look out. I think nature really helps inspire me as well.
Definitely. Wow,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. And you know what?
Yeah.
It's so surprising to some people how many authors meditate. you know, because we constantly have these characters or ideas knocking around in our brain, and it's like, okay, I'll write it down. Just give me a few minutes. But to center yourself and to kind of have that quiet time, I think is invaluable. And to kind of shut everything off and just be so in the moment of your writing, I think is so beautiful. So,
Yeah.
when I was reading your book, I felt so many different emotions. Like some parts made me laugh, other parts I was like, wow, that is such an introspective kind of depth where I'm going to look at myself and say, how do I feel about this? And,
Mhm.
while writing your book, did you have any kind of feeling that surprised you or felt misplaced? And did you discover anything new about yourself while writing?
Oh, wow. Yeah, definitely a lot of emotion when I write. Um, and and what I always find really, really interesting is how the emotion can change even within the same poem.
Yes.
Um, so for me, so I'll just give you a couple of examples. There's one poem called Perfectly Unfinished in my collection, which is about my father's passing away, which is about 4 or 5 years ago. And there's this concept of like there's the pain of because he had trouble breathing at the end of his life. But then there's this celebration piece near the end. And I find my emotion changes as I'm writing. And then there's another piece on birth, which of course is usually a celebration. But I was thinking about my first child, my son's cry in the room, which felt like, yes, it's a celebration. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, right? They hear that first sound. But it's such a sorrowful place too, to be parting the womb, which is such a sacred, protective, comfortable place, and then to be put out under bright lights and cold air. So I think, when you say, what did I discover about myself? I think that whole idea that emotion is energy in motion, I really feel that about myself when I'm writing is nothing stays the same. It's like almost like a flip of a coin that you can have pain on one side and intense bliss and joy on the other. So that was the big discovery for me, is that even in those lowest moments, right around the corner are those highest moments. It's that, the fact that
Oh,
everything's changing. Yeah.
absolutely. And that's the only constant that they say in life is change,
Right.
right? So I
Yeah.
think that that's so beautiful. And, like you gave it such a different perspective in terms of like the whole protection of the womb and then coming out under bright lights, like you said, in the cold air and being really torn from your house, basically.
Mhm.
And,
Right.
I just think that you really brought so much raw emotion to this book that people are going to get such different things from it. So that kind of leads me into my next quote question. What do you want readers to take from your book?
And like you said, like, I mean, these are all, some of them are very personal experiences, but I feel as human beings, there's so much that we share, right? So, we all go through points in our lives where we're buying into societal norms. We all have anger. We all have aging bodies. We're all going to face the death of a loved one. All of these things that sort of bind us in being human. My hope is that others are able to take what I've written about my own experiences and say, oh, I can really relate to this. And brings them to sort of a deeper place within themselves. I have someone who just read my book who said, through your words, I went along my own journey and I found pieces of myself.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, when I read that, I was like, yeah, that's what I want. That's what I really want my readers to get.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think that anyone who reads your book, Words of Healing, letter by letter, is going to get that out of it. It's their own
Mhm.
personal feelings and what they connect to. And it just makes it such a wonderful, immersive experience. And you can get Fazila's book at pandemoniumpublishing.com or on Amazon. And whatever you do, if you decide to get the book, if you want to leave a review, that would be wonderful. We would absolutely love that. And you can just send us an email, pandapublishing8@gmail.com, and we'll make sure that we put that review up. So you've done a lot of writing, and who are the poets who inspire you, and why do they inspire you? Because I feel like as writers, we always have those kind of things that we take from other authors that we're like, wow, I really love this piece, or I really love this author and the way that they speak or write. And what who inspired you as a poet, and why did that inspiration come from them?
Mhm. And you know, I won't talk about sort of the early poets like Rumi or Hafiz,
Sure.
but sort of the modern poets that I treasure and that are such an inspiration for me. One would be David White, and the other would be Jane Hirschfield. I What I love about both of their works are that they're I find the humility in their pieces. There's so much gratitude. They take small things and just put them in such poetic, grateful form. So, you know, the kettle is boiling. David White in Everything is Waiting for You says the kettle is singing even as it pours you a drink. You know, so
Wow.
it's just the way, and I can read Jane Hirschfield's pieces over and over and get something different each time. David White, I would highly recommend looking him up on the internet and watching some of his spoken word where he repeats a lot of lines. So his expression to me is so deep and meaningful. Jane Hirschfield has written this book. It's called Nine Gates, Entering the Mind of Poetry.
Wow.
And it speaks to both the reader and the writer of poetry. So I think it's just the depth of their work. And I find my work is very much about healing poetry and inspirational poetry, and they are along those lines as well. So they're big role models for me. Yeah.
Awesome. I love that. And thank you for sharing that with our readers so that maybe they could check that out as well.
Mm.
Um, do you belong to any writing groups, or did you take any writing classes? I know you mentioned someone who was your course professor for poetry, but can you talk to us about the writing classes and groups that you were in, and also what did you gain from those?
Okay, so yes, the instructor I mentioned, Shalene, she taught me two courses at U of T. I took three poetry classes at U of T in their continuing education program. It was their creative writing piece, and I loved them. I thought I got a lot out of some of the structure, doing a lot of the looking at how punctuation and things like capital letters and could be used and challenged differently, right?
Yes.
So a lot of technique in these courses. So I loved that. But I think what I loved most about it was workshopping. And in fact, I have a little workshop group and we meet monthly, and everyone sort of submits a poem prior, and you have to recite your poem to the group, and then the group's going to give you feedback. And so we started this workshopping in these courses where they would have workshop nights, and a few of us decided we need to like keep doing this. And although I love Instagram because I post a lot of my small writing segments there, and it's always such a positive space, but in workshopping, it's more, this is what I loved, and here's what I would have loved to see, or, you know,
Yes,
so you get some of that critical feedback, and I love that because then you're constantly improving your craft.
definitely.
So workshopping
That's
is, I think, a big piece for me. Yeah.
That's wonderful. What a great idea. And when we're writing things like novels and things like that, we have beta groups who do the same for us. We
Mhm.
kind of give them chapters at a time, and they say, this is what I love, this is what I think you should change, this is what I think is too repetitive. So learning from each other just makes us better writers. And I agree. I think it's such a
Totally.
wonderful experience.
Yeah.
So do you have any future poetry projects that you're working on, or is there anything new that you're working on? If you want to share
Okay.
that with us, unless it's
Oh my
top
God.
secret.
No, I would love to share that. I so enjoyed this whole process, and I loved working with Pandamonium Publishing House. So
Aw,
I definitely want to do that again.
thank you.
Yeah, such a great experience, right? With all the images you put behind my poems, it just all came to life. I want to do it all over.
Awesome.
So I'm thinking of doing a part two, and actually 26 other words.
Wow.
So,
Awesome.
Yeah.
I
And I
love
was
that.
thinking of doing like I mean, X may be a little bit challenging, but, but, I've already thought about A, right? Accountability, such a great word. And it comes from counting, right? Originally from the idea of counting. And look how it's evolved to this concept of taking responsibility, right?
Yeah.
So, I want to be able to, I find also doing this A to Z, what was great about it, particularly because I have such a busy law career, is I could put up a schedule and say, okay, this is when this letter is done by, right?
Yes.
At the
Yes.
same time, I need to give myself breathing room to be able to create, but that there's some flow to that structure, and to keep that going. So I can't say when it would be ready, but
Yeah.
I would love to do. I would love to do another collection and
Yeah.
pick and do the same concept of mix of etymology and poetry.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love the combination of the two. And it's very interesting because not only are people learning things about themselves while they're reading your book, but they're also learning about language and history and things like that, which I think is wonderful. So,
Mhm.
this is the last question. Is there any advice that you could give to aspiring writers or poets? And if you could tell them one thing, what would it be?
Oh, one
I
thing.
know that's a hard question.
Yeah, really hard. So many things. The one thing I would say is to be your authentic self. I feel like that's what readers really, really want. It gives them permission to be in their truth. And I'll just give you an example. There's one poem in there that I sort of like cringe when I think about it. It's called Closer. And it's about my experience of leaving religion and why I left the formal practice of religion. And I started to, when I worked on that, thought, oh my gosh, if I ever put this out there, I want to soften the edges, make sure I don't offend anyone in the community or my family who is very religious. And as soon as I started doing that, it didn't feel real and raw to me. Like it didn't feel like I was being my true authentic self. So, I'm actually, I don't know if you've heard of the book Untamed by Glennon
Yes.
Doyle. Oh,
Yes.
she says in that book, every truth is a kindness, even if it makes people uncomfortable. Every untruth is an unkindness, even if it makes others comfortable. And I think people do want to get out of their comfort zones, right?
Yes.
People want to be able to stretch themselves. So again, it's about giving them permission to be their true selves and not worry about trying to please everyone. I know
Oh,
there's going to
I
be people
love
who
that.
take offense, right? With that poem, for instance, but I came from my truth and that was so
Absolutely.
liberating.
Definitely. I love that. Love that answer. Absolutely. We always look for authenticity because not only does it free us to be who we
Mhm.
are, but it also, like you said, allows readers to be who they are. But it
Mhm.
also gives us kind of this ability to um, get rid of some baggage sometimes. When
Oh
you write
yeah.
something in your truth and you write, kind of what you want to say, not what you think you should say, it's such a freeing experience. And you can definitely put it to bed and be done with it. And maybe sometimes that's an issue that you've been having for a while. And then you just are able to write about it and release it. That's what I love about writing too.
Yeah.
And, you've
Yeah.
done this in your book. And we're going to put a link at the bottom of this so that you can order Fazila's book from wherever you go shopping. And we're hopefully going to get some book signings and things like that going this year. And I can't wait for you to meet her. She's absolutely lovely. And it has been a pleasure working with you. And we just can't wait to see what you come up with next. So, pandemoniumpublishing.com. I'm going to put up this interview. We're going to put it on our YouTube channel and our social media channels. And thank you so much for joining us today, Fazila. And
Oh my
thank
gosh,
you for your
Lacey.
wonderful book.
Yeah, it has been such a pleasure working with you and your team. I
Thank
have to
you.
say the professionalism and just, really making my dream come true about
Oh,
publishing this. You
thank
guys
you.
were, yeah,
Thank you
beyond
so
my
much.
expectations. So
Thank
thank
you
you.
so much. And I really am excited to share this book with you. So, like I said, I will put the link in the bottom of all the comments and you'll be able to just click on it and add to cart. So, thanks for joining us today. And we will see you again soon. Thanks,
Thank you.
Fazila. Take care.
Bye-bye.